Our film begins with Captain Baker Dale, who is on a large fishing boat, and his assistant, Doc, stays with him, and two tourists and those who catch him in Baker's boat for money, and Becker keeps watching a certain bird in the sky, and whoever first sees it knows that there is a certain fish in the sea, and who will be his goal, and he sees the hook as it moves, so he takes it from the tourist and pulls it himself, and it annoys the tourist very much. This is because he paid special money to catch a fish. And he fights with Baker. But Baker raises the knife on him and tells him to stay away from him, and Doc tries to guide him and tells him that it is not at all whether it was the fish he wanted or not, so Baker tells him that his feeling tells him that it is the fish he is looking for, and he keeps trying to tighten it all day. And he reaches the fullest stage of fatigue, but he does not give up, to some extent. Bring the fish closer to the boat, so Baker tells Duke to take the hook instead and pull the fish, and a baker grabs a hook to kill the fish with, to strip it out of the water, but Doug tells him that the fish is deceiving him. Indeed, as he pulls it, it slips away from the hook and runs away for 100. Ben collapsed from fatigue, but he remains determined to catch her one day. Doc annoys him. This is because it is the customers and the money. Baker tells him that he will pay him, and he goes to bake for his girlfriend, who knows that he needs money, so she gives it to him, and she tells him that she knows that the bank refused to extend the deadline for payment, but she will always stay beside him. Baker thanks her, and my hand is Doc's money. Doc asks him if he even has money, composite fuel for real, so he tells him not to care and come tomorrow on time. This is because they will ride the boat alone without tourists, and the whole city remains aware of their love. Speaker with the fish he wants to catch, and they keep thinking that she is only in Baker's uncle, and it doesn't actually exist, and at night he goes to a bar. There, the owner of the tavern asks him about the name of the fish, and he asks him to give her a name. Because she has a history with him, he actually tells him that he named it in the name of justice. And on the second day he goes to his boat, and he keeps waiting for the fish with Doc all day, until he despairs, and he returns to the enamel while he is fanatic, so he tells him that he stops thinking about the fish and tries to earn better money, so Becker gets mad at him and tells him that his wife died some time ago and he is bad luck. And he decides to kick him out of the boat, and he tells him to go work somewhere else. Doc walks away while he is fanatic, and it turns out that there is a person wearing a suit watching from afar, and Baker returns home. There he recalls his memories with a young child, and he keeps talking to him and telling him that he's sorry he can't take it in his hands like in the past. Suddenly Becker beats his alarm as if he was dreaming, and he goes, as usual, to his boat to try to catch the fish, and at night he sits in the tavern where he always sits. Suddenly, a beautiful girl named Karen entered him, who is Baker's ex-wife, and you ask him to talk in a far place, and they go to Baker's boat. And you see them who stays at her house in the direction of Elmina, and it blooms that she is jealous. And in the boat, Baker asks about what she wants from him after these years. So she tells him that he was right and she was wrong, and that her husband, Frank, beats and singles her. She tells him that she tried to escape more than once, but every time he was able to reach her because of his great victory. Everywhere. And you say that everything that remains is richer. All that remains is more brutal and nervous. Becker asks her about their son, Eric, who lives in this environment. Karen replies in a tone of sadness, and she says that their son keeps hiding in his bed while he hears her screams in pain, and that all the time he keeps playing on his computer, and she says that the teachers say that he is a genius child. She asks him to help her because of their son, and offers him to kill Frank for $10 million, and she promised him that he would see his son at any time. Baker smiles a sarcastic smile and tells her that it is impossible for him to do that. Karen tells him that she convinced Frank that she is preparing a trip for him on the best fishing boats in the world, and she tells him that her plan is to keep the two of them on one boat, because it gets so drunk, it can easily be thrown into the water for sharks to eat. So Baker gets angry with her and tells her that he will not be involved in a murder and kicks her out of the boat. Karen returns to the hotel, and she stays in her bathroom. Suddenly, her husband, Frank, enters her, and Karen goes into labor. How can he come? And this is because there are no currents for the place where they are on that day, So he tells her that he rented a private plane to surprise her, and then he makes her take off her clothes, and he wears his freshness. And he keeps looking at every detail of her body to know if she cheated on him or not, and he sees a very small scratch on her body, so he takes off his belt and hits her with it. On the next day, the news of Frank's arrival spreads to the whole city, and Baker stays in a store buying hooks for his rod. So the owner of the shop tells him about what happened to her before his appointment, and she tells him that the whole hotel knew that he hit her with the belt on her body, and it was without making any sound, and Baker shows that he is not interested and walks away, and he reaches his boat, and there Peggy, Frank and Karen are talking to him, and he asks him. Frank says he spends a day on his boat for $10,000, but Baker refuses and tells him that he does not have his assistant, and the law does not allow a tourist to go out with a fisherman alone. He tells Frank that there is only one policeman in town, and that he puts the law in his hands, which he wants with his money, and he is asked to meet tomorrow at 7 o'clock to move him. In the boat, Frank shows his gun from under his jacket, as a kind of threat to Baker, so Baker is forced and decides to take Duke with him. And whoever agrees after knowing that Baker fired him from work so that he would not be wronged with him, Baker returns home, and there he finds a woman waiting for him, and she asks him about his relationship with her, but Baker does not respond to it and takes off his clothes and dives into the sea. Suddenly, he sees his son Eric floating with him, and he keeps trying to get close to him, but suddenly he surpasses Baker and finds himself at home. And his support is all water, and there is also water left on the table. Meanwhile, he remains at home, sitting in front of the computer, with his water cup on the table. Baker and Eric touch the water at the same time. On the second day, he goes on his date with Franco Karen. On the way, he meets Karen, who tells him that his son is sitting at his computer all the time, listening to everything he says, and she believes that they are connected to each other in some way, and she asks him to save her and her son and implement their plan. But Baker does not respond to her and walks and leaves her. He gets on the boat with Frank and Doc. There, he asks Frank Baker about the girls in town. This is because he wants to enter into a relationship with them. Baker asks him if he has children. Frank tells him that his wife has a child from her ex-husband, and it's just stupid and insane child, even though his teachers tell him about him. And Frank tells him that his wife's son is always on his own bed, and that he always tries to play football with him or communicate with him in any way, but he remains refusing. Until one day he decides to break the room door on him, and then he threw it from his computer chair, and asked him what he did. At that time, Eric answered him and told him that he was playing a game of fisherman on a boat trying to catch a fish of justice in order to kill him, and he gets shocked as soon as he hears what is being said, and he remembers what Karen was saying to him. He and Eric are related, and he doesn't understand how his son repeats his words, and he feels that he really wants to kill Frank. Suddenly, a fire moves, but Baker knows it's just a shark, and helps Frank catch it and bring it back to port, and there Karen waits for them and gets frustrated when she sees her husband back on the boat with them, and she waits for someone to come out, and she begins to break his account, telling him that tomorrow they will be $1 million, and you tell him that this is what his son wants. He hears it from Doc and sits down with Baker to understand his relationship with Karen, and he knows that she offered him to kill her husband, so he advises him that he does not agree. And this is because he is a good person who knows that there is God, and that whatever happened from Frank, he must be sure that no one deserves to be killed. And he walks and leaves him, and he stays up all night on his boat and thinks about what he should do. Suddenly, Karen comes in disguise and enters the boat with him, and confesses to him that she has loved him all the past years. They show him their passport ring, which she still keeps, and they remember each other's memories when they first got to know each other, and then they enter into a relationship, and he sees Baker secretly beating Karen's body, and he feels sad, and he decides to implement the plan. Then Karen returns to the hotel, and Baker returns home, and there he remains waiting for the same person who was watching him, and his name is Mr. Miller, and he remains working with a fishing equipment company. He wants to sell Baker a device to locate the fish, so he apologizes to Baker and tells him that he has a long day tomorrow and he needs to rest, so Miller tells Him he knows what he has, and that's why you have to take the device. And he tells him that he will give it to him for free, and he begs him to catch the fish tomorrow. Baker is surprised by Miller's determination to take the device and catch the fish. And he asks him about what he knows about him. Miller tells him to catch the fish and not kill Frank. Baker is very surprised, and he attacks Miller, and he asks him how. He knew he was going to kill Frank tomorrow. Miller tells him to look around, and everything is repeated, and that he himself does not remember the time that came and that he does not even know the location of the island on the world map, and they say that the island they are on is a game made by someone. The island is full of games and challenges, but the main goal of the game and the mediator of the fish of justice, he tells him that his job is to represent the rules of the game, and that's why he asks him not to deviate from the rules, and this is because I don't know why the game maker changed the game's objective from hunting to killing. Baker kicks Miller out of the house, then it looks at the world map, and he can't really find the island, and Baker is shocked, and suddenly he finds himself healthy. A minute before the alarm, and he wants to get up from sleep, he finds that his whole body is paralyzed. As soon as the alarm rings, his body moves easily, and he goes to his date with Frank and Karen. Meanwhile, Karen wakes up. Suddenly, she finds blood in the place of her husband, Frank. You quickly go to the bathroom and see him lying on the floor, and he bleeds and his hand remains broken. Karen helps him get up. He tells her that he will not be able to go fishing today. Karen is shocked, friendly because it's her last chance. At this time, Baker reaches Almina Street, and there he is passing on the owner of the hook shop, and it remains doubtful that she knows anything about the game, and then he talks to the owner of the tavern, but he discovers that none of them knows the location of the island on the map, and he does not remember the time when he came to the island or the time he spent there, and Baker arrives at his boat and finds Doc waiting and confesses to him that he paid someone to beat him, and this is because he is trying to protect him from committing sin, so Baker collapses and expels Doc overboard, and he keeps drinking until he gets drunk, and then he takes a walk. He drives his car to a far place, and he prefers to sit alone in front of the beach, and Mr. Miller comes to talk to him and asks him to know who made the game, so Baker tells him that he is just a little boy who hears the cries of his mother's pen every day, and that's why he decided to make a determination through which he can get rid of the person who hurt him and his mother in order to achieve justice. Miller tells him that he still has a chance, and that's because Karen was able to convince Frank to get on the boat, so Baker quickly gets into his car and reaches the boat. There he meets Karen and Frank, who is unable to move, and they ride together in the boat. Karen prefers to let Frank drink more and more. Suddenly, a son appears in the boat, and he tells Baker that his mother told him to come with him and help him. Karen is shocked and tells Baker that it is impossible for them to postpone the mission. Baker tells her not to worry. At this time, Eric will be sitting in front of the screen, and it appears that he is helping his father implement the plan. And then he opens his father's wooden box, and he gets the same knife that stays with Baker all the time in the game, and he takes the knife and gets out of the room. On the island, the hook moves, and Baker knows that it is the same fish he was always looking for, so he makes Frank hold the hook instead, and then he leaves it. And because Frank remains very weak, he can't stand in his place, and the fish expects him in the water and takes him away, and that's how the crime appears in front of Ibn. That it's just an accident, and they come back to us at this time in the city, where I show you, and an announcement is made of a murder committed by a child named Eric, and that he killed his stepfather who was beating them, and the news anchor continues and says that she testified that her son was trying to defend her at the time. Her husband was beating her while he was drunk, and Eric is arrested to some extent. The court decides to punish him or release him, being a victim of assault, and remember the news that Eric is the son of former Colonel John Samo, and who died in war years ago, and John remains, same as Baker, on the island. Baker bids farewell to Karen, who suddenly disappears in front of him. Then the public phone rings. Baker responds to him and discovers that his son, and the one who tells him that there are changes in the game, and he will come to meet him, and suddenly the scene changes around Baker, and he finds himself at the boat, and Eric runs to him and hugs him. And don't forget to subscribe to the Ladybug Synopsis channel.